Good morning, everyone. Good to be with you again. I'm going to put this over here. Is that okay? One of those nights where I just kept rolling around. You ever have one of those nights? It's like you're afraid you're going to miss a flight or something. You just keep waking up. So if I doze off in the middle of this talk, I'm just going to pass out my notes and you guys will be up to date. Does that sound okay? Yeah, 2.5 pages notes. Take-home value is great. Anyway, we are in this series. This is the third week of a 7-week series, so we're not even halfway through the storm. We're still in the midst of it, yeah? And it's based on this book by Gary Simmons, Eye of the Storm, Embracing Conflict, Creating Peace. Who's up for both of those? Embracing conflict and creating peace. Yeah. Embracing is an interesting word when it comes to conflict. We talked about that last week, that typically conflict is something that, in our human sensitivity, we don't like conflict. We would rather avoid conflict, wouldn't we? Yes? Yeah. Because in some sense, I think, in the human sense, we see that conflict is evidence of something that is against us, right? Something, when we have conflict with another person, we tend to feel like that person doesn't get us, or they're against us, or some version of feeling separate, and we don't like that feeling. But what if conflict, seen rightly, seen through the lens of the way we've been looking at this over these last few weeks, what if conflict is actually a revelation of what's missing in our way of being with life, including other people, in a way that would show how we are seeing life in a way that is creating a sense of separation, and it isn't the actual event or the circumstance or the person that is causing that feeling of separation. Then wouldn't conflict, if it is going to be revealing of that path to greater wholeness and sense of our self-worth, wouldn't conflict be something that we could see in the context of something that's for us as opposed to against us? Does that make sense? So that's the shift that we're here to make. And unity tends to sort of put a positive spin on everything, and we can just say that it's all good because God is good and there's only one presence and one power. And that sometimes can be like a spiritual bypass for some of us, because we haven't really worked the logic of that understanding so that it actually applies to those situations in our life that do feel to be against us. So unless we do this work, unless we clarify how it is that it is our response to what shows up in life that creates either a sense of separation or a sense of connection to the one, to each other. Unless we do that, then we're stuck with this sort of an empty affirmation that doesn't really work for us. Does that make sense? So we're really looking at a practical approach to the difficulties of life, including the conflicts that arise, as a normal part of the human journey. I don't think anyone gets through life without conflict. If they do, they're probably living in a cave and they're just sort of avoiding, relationships, right? These relationships, really bring us up against our differences, don't they? Yes. And boy, they can be challenging, yes? So before I get too far into today's talk, I do want to start again with this. Basically, it would be like our statement of faith with a little bit of a rub, saying that there's nothing against us, but we need to remember that. So here we go again. No one is against you. This is the absolute truth. And that's what we know about these statements, right? They're absolute truth. That means that, wait a minute, no exceptions? No, not even that situation, not even that person. This is the absolute truth. You may not believe it now, and you may have a lifetime of evidence to the contrary, and don't we? Yes? You got it. But until you realize that the entire universe is for you, you may never experience your wholeness and true worth. The purpose of this book is to awaken you to the truth that there is only one presence and one power at work in your life, and that this presence and power lives in you as the very Spirit of God. For this reason, no one or nothing can be against you. This is logical, right? To realize this is to claim your divine inheritance as a beloved creation of God. So we can't have these absolute statements and then say, yeah, but there's this exception. Right? It's either true or it's not. So what we're doing here is we're taking this basic statement of faith that we claim and declare and affirm week after week after week, and hopefully throughout the week, and we put it to the test. Because if it's true, then it must always be true, right? We're not talking about something that's dualistic. We're talking about something that there's only one truth. This one presence and this one power and this one life is your reality. And knowing that is one thing, intellectually. Living that is a whole nother game, yes? Because we have to square that truth with the circumstances of our life that seem to belie that truth. Because when we come up against difficulties in our life, when we come up against challenges, whether they're financial challenges or relationship challenges or any kind of challenges that we have, and they seem to be against us, then does that mean that that statement is not true? Or does that mean, and this is really where the rubber meets the road, or does that mean that it's my reaction to that circumstance and that situation is giving me the interpretation that life is against me, but it really isn't. So that's really this work that we have. And today's sub-theme for this series is communion. And no, we're not talking about the wine and the wafers, although there is certainly a tradition for that. We respect it. And what is the wine and the wafers? But it is a symbolic way of representing the notion of being one with God, right? Being one with the divine. And we can do rituals like that, but the work that we're really about, since we believe that the divine is where? Within us. That we don't really need external symbols or external rituals necessarily in order to create the experience of oneness, do we? Because if that's already what's true for us, then it's about us removing whatever might stand in the way, a belief that we might have, or a notion that we have, or thoughts and feelings that we have acquired over a lifetime of conditioning that has shows up as an obstacle to the realization of our oneness with love and with peace and joy and with happiness. So we're really here to work at the level of where the problem is. And the problem is not that there isn't one presence and one power. That is a given. That is the truth. And when we get past the false, that's what we experience. Isn't that pretty profound? Because if that is what we are, then isn't the work really to sort of like exfoliate this sort of false veil that sort of keeps us from the experience of that connection to the love and the peace and the wholeness that is our very nature. And so we're really working at practically to remove those scales from our eyes that has us seeing life as against us and seeing us being separate from God and separate from life and separate from each other. That's really the work. Are we in it for it? Are we in it? Good. That's great. So relationships. And we all have relationships, and relationships are not just relationships with people, right? We can have relationships with circumstances. We can have relationships with our body even, because our body, if it's not doing particularly well, it can feel like it is against us. We can actually have an enemy image for our body, or just circumstances, or the government, or the weather, or whatever can seem to be against us. So relationships, there really is only one relationship that we have. What is that? but it has 3 sub-arenas. So those 3 arenas are us, you, and life, and God. So the idea is that if we're working at the level of the truth, then we should be able to have an experience of communion with God, with life, and with one another. That's the goal, right? Would that be okay? We had that? Yeah. And it isn't like it's some fanciful, idealized notion, because if there's only one thing going on, if there is only one reality, then it doesn't really matter whether that relationship is with another person, because they are what? They are one with that one also, right? In truth. I may not be showing you that in a moment, but that doesn't mean that that isn't true for them. And we don't want to put our false interpretation of them on top of their illusion, right? So we don't want to add to their confusion by seeing them as being separate from God because of some behavior. We would really like to move back to that same, excuse me, that same connection that we have with when we are in our deepest meditation. We feel that peace that passes human understanding. That same feeling is possible with another when we are looking at them through the lens of the truth, who they are. And we're not letting our interpretation or the meaning that we make for their behavior stand in the way of that recognition. So that's the work that we have. So what stands in the way of us feeling this presence and this power and this love, whether it's in relationship to others or to ourselves or to God, is this notion of, excuse me, of separation. Are you going to get me one of those little things? I had one already, but I guess I need another one. Anyway, so separation is what? Separation, is the separation a real thing, or is separation just something that we've come to believe? Something we've come to believe. And is something that you come to believe, does that mean that it's permanent? Does that mean that it can be changed, that it can be let go? Have you ever had beliefs that you outgrew? Remember the Easter Bunny? Oh, excuse me, are there any kids in here? I did that on church one time, and there were some kids, and parents left the church. Ruined it right there. But I think we're all old enough. Maybe we're going back to that. Anyway, so yeah, so this notion of separation is something that we took on. And there's lots of myths in many religions as to how this happened. You probably have heard the one, this is the Christian tradition, it's called what? The fall. Remember the fall? Not that you remember the fall. It comes after the summer. No, not that. And the idea in that story, and of course this is allegory, so it's not literal, but it helps us understand this notion that at one time we were one with the one. This is not in time, but this is in consciousness. Thank you so much. Oh, that's good. There's some in the ministers, I don't know, in the drawer on the top right side. Oh, that's good. Where was I? Fall. Thank you. So at one time, and again, this is like foundational into the notion of who and what we taken ourselves to be. But in the beginning, we were one with God, and we, even as we were born into this world, we had this sense of connection with all of life. Thank you so much. Excuse me while I eat in front of you. And so, somewhere along the line in that experience, this is going to get in the way of me talking to you, so it could be a little crunchy. But somewhere along the line, we lost that connection. Right? Not that it actually happened, but in our mind, we began to believe that we were separate. And of course, as you and I were growing up, we developed through the way that we were interacted with by our parents and our caregivers in the world, came to believe that we were the individual little characters. This one was called a Larry. Had your names, and you were told what was yours, and these are your toys, and this is you, and that's Mary over here, and there's Mary, and she's got her stuff. And so we really sort of built this notion up that we're separate. And of course, we just use our senses, just the five senses. This is where we can pick up discernment and discretion between objects, and we can see that we're obviously separate. And we lost the identity that was rooted in this notion of our spiritual oneness, right? And so as we grew, we kept living out this notion that we are separate beings. Then we became very vulnerable, right? Because if you're separate in this world, then you have to take care of this vulnerable, fragile, separate thing called a body. And then you have your needs because you've learned that certain activities that you did in your life got positive results and some got negative results. And so you went through life developing life needing to be a certain way in order for you to feel okay. A little alliteration there. So we came by this honestly, right? But that doesn't mean that it's the ultimate truth. It just means it's the relative truth of what you and I came to believe. And it has created this sense of separation where we're in such great need of life being a particular way, and people particularly in a particular way, for us to feel love, and to feel wholeness, and to feel connected to a sense of, oh, I'm okay. But that's such a dependency, right? That we rarely ever experience that all the time. We typically experience some version of there's something missing. Even when you get this plate spinning over here, that's your relationship with your partner, or you've got the job thing and you're feeling, compensated and acknowledged, and that's all going well. Then there's something else, because there's this never-ending reliance upon outside events, circumstances, and conditions to align with your preferences according to these human needs. And isn't that exhausting? And isn't that why most of the time most people are not happy, right? We're not happy because we just keep wanting life to be a particular way, and that just can't be. It's just not the way it works. At least it doesn't in most people's lives, and I don't know anybody's life where it always works out that way. So what we're looking for is, we're looking for ways of sort of closing this the gap that is represented by our expectations for other people and for life to be a particular way. And the way that we do that is we recognize when we're doing it. So that we become, instead of being unconscious and constantly finding ourselves unhappy or needy, we say, what is it that's going on in my mind right now, or what is the meaning that I'm making out of the situation that's having me feel like life is against me? And when you can begin to identify those things and seeing them for what they are, then we can begin to make a different choice. Because again, heralding back to our one principle, there's one presence and one power in the universe, and that's omnipotent. In other words, that's all powerful. Nothing has the power over me unless I give it that power. Is that right? So this is where we take this human, the illusion of the human scene, which is, my happiness is dependent upon others being a particular way, and we realize that that is a form of it's a form of separation. It's a separating notion, right? And there's this other thing called, have you heard of codependency? Not you guys, but people in your life, right? So codependency, I got to tell you a little joke, and then I'll talk about it. So when I was in ministerial school, we had a lot of psychology, and they would talk about these dynamics like codependency. And the professor, would say, okay, well, you guys are all smart, so you tell me what it is, instead of preaching to us and evoke this from us. So I remember sitting there, and 5 or 6 people raised their hand, one after another. He went, no, that's kind of it, but that's not really it. And so finally, after 5 or 6 people, no one raised their hand. And so this one gal who was sitting one of the students sitting next to me at my table, she looked up at him and she said, what would you like us to say? There you go. There it is. There's another joke too about someone's diagnosed with codependency, which is all of us basically, and they have a near-death experience, and everyone else's life that they've ever known flashes before their eyes. Anyway, so what we know about codependency is, and we all come by this honestly as well, is that other people's welfare is of concern to us. In other words, our well-being is somehow compromised or diminished or limited by somebody else's not being okay or doing okay. And again, we grew up in families where our behavior sometimes elicited responses from our caregivers. Some were positive and some were negative. And the ones who were negative, we really paid attention to, right? Because we tend to be Velcro for the negative. We want to make sure we do things that are going to bring us what we want and keep away those things we don't want. So we tend to be always in a state of yearning for what we want and pushing away what we don't want. And that dynamic around that behavior has us typically needing people to be happy in order for us to be happy. Now you may say, oh no, I'm not that way. But wait, there's many examples of how that happens in our life. So what we really want to do when we're realizing that codependency is having its way with our well-being is to ask ourselves, where is my well-being? Where does it reside? I mean, it's really about pulling that notion of your well-being back from the relationship in which you have granted the other person power over your happiness and well-being. Isn't that right? And I mean, if there's only one presence and one power, and you know that you are it, in other words, that is your true nature, then whatever anybody else is doing or saying or not doing or not saying should have nothing whatsoever to do with your essential happiness, although it may give you an experience of, of fleeting happiness or unhappiness. And that's okay, because we're still going to be human. If my wife gets upset, I'm not going to be steeling myself against her upset, but I'm also not going to take responsibility for her upset, because I know that that's the decision she's making, right? And if somebody is judging you, or if somebody's judging me, right, is that necessarily saying something about me? No. It's when someone judges you, it says something about them, right? But me reacting to somebody else's judgment is about me. So that's where we begin to tease apart these relationship dynamics, where we begin to understand that we have the capacity to soothe ourselves, and we have the capacity to fulfill our own needs by our connection with this one presence, this one power, this one life. And when we're finding ourselves being, our well-being feeling like it's being drained by the circumstances of our life, it's an invitation for us to come back and pull our power back and pull the awareness back to our heart space, yes? Where we can find the comfort that we thought was going to be dependent upon somebody or something else being in alignment with our preferences, for example, like all the time, right? For example. Yeah. So we understand that relationships can be challenging, yes, but they also can be pointers to where we're still not free, yes? And so they can give us like, what's the word, like they could be like breadcrumbs that can lead us back to the source of our well-being, when we've lost ourselves out in the wilderness of believing that life has to be a certain way and people need to be a particular way. So when we see that we're challenged in a relationship, instead of it being a call to arms, like we need to get this other person to change, and there may be time for that, there may be time for conversations. But the first thing we want to do is we want to take responsibility for our own experience. Yes? We want to go to our God. We want to go to our God self. We want to go to our heart and ask, what is our heart really needing? And maybe you need respect, or maybe you need consideration, or maybe you need to be seen for who you are, or maybe you need to matter in life, or in your work or something. And all of those are human needs, but they don't necessarily need to be met outside of ourselves. Because if you are connected with this one presence and one power, there is no need. God has no needs. God doesn't have those needs. And your true essence has no such needs. You came by them honestly, came by them through the way that you grew up and the conditioning that you experienced, and that's all well and good. It's not about feeling guilty or less than or feeling diminished because you have these needs. But it is also not about externalizing them, yes? Because this is where we get in trouble. If I make you what's wrong with me, then I've really missed the boat. Not only have I missed the source of my discomfort being here, but I've also made you wrong. And that's where wars come from, right? It's all this sort of projection instead of getting clear about where the need is and how we can soothe ourselves by reconnecting with the truth of our being. So I think I've run out of voice, but I do want to do a little meditation with you. So let's go there, shall we? So I just invite you to take a deep breath as we process this in our heads. And let's just begin by remembering this beautiful truth that we were created in the image and likeness of God, and nothing has changed. The essence of us is love itself, is life itself. Peace is our true nature. And we have come to this time in our journey of life in which we are discovering even more profoundly that the source of our well-being is within us. That in our heart of hearts, we find that love that we have sought perhaps externally. We find that there is a prevailing sense of well-being and happiness right here, right now. It's made real when we allow the heart to open and let go of the stories. We all have our stories. But the greatest story is that you are spiritual. You are a spiritual being. The greatest story is that you have no needs in the spiritual sense. That everything that you have been yearning for and looking for outside of you is available within your own being. So we give thanks for the power and the presence and the love of God that is here and now. Just allow it to radiate from our heart center, moving out in all directions. It's a light that cannot be diminished. It's a light that can shine in even the darkest places. Even in those places of enmity, unforgiveness, anger, resentment, even the most difficult emotions cannot stand up to the presence and the power and the love which heals all things, which dissolves the seeming sense of separation, which removes the blocks from love's presence. which makes it possible for us to be in the midst of whatever life throws at us and still allow for this capacity to be at peace, to be connected to a sense of wholeness and self-worth that is undisturbed and imperturbable. This is who we are. This is who we are. This is who we have come here to realize. So if there's a story that is floating around in our minds that would suggest that we can't be happy or we can't feel love or peace is not possible, when we ask this presence, this power, this love that is right here with us, as us, to help us see through that illusion. For it is not possible for the truth to be anything other than the truth, for the presence to be anything other than here and now, for the power to have any opposing force that can limit or obstruct or delay it in our lives. So let's take a moment in the silence of our own hearts to ask for this movement of energy, this opening of love and life and light, to illuminate anything that right now feels heavy or dark or diminishing as us in some way. Let's invite it into love. Let it grow. Let it have its way in us. Quiet. So we give thanks for this time of remembering, of bringing the truth to bear upon those stories that would seem to separate us from love's presence, for the overcoming power of this great truth that has never left us and never can, to know that it is always available in response to the invitation that we invited into our experience. We open our hearts. This may continue as we may here today and encounter those temptations to feel apart, love from God. We're thankful